Welcome, everybody. I'm Greg Demetrio, and this is Ask a CEO. I'm the CEO of Lorraine Gregory Communications, and the Ask a CEO interview series is about highlighting important companies and their CEOs to find out what really goes on and what the real situation is in the C-suite. Today, we have a very special guest, and as always, I don't want to mess up my intro, so I use my notes, so I'll apologize in advance. Mr. Jeffrey Bass is the owner of Executive Strategies Group, which is a business advisory and consulting enterprise. For over 35 years, Mr. Bass has assisted businesses and organizations with strategic, operational, and financial matters. He's well known in the top echelons of business owners, executives, and professionals. He was a principal of Margolin, Weiner, and Evans, a major accounting firm here on Long Island, and was in charge of the Strategic Business Advisory Services. He's the founder and chairman emeritus of the Long Island Capital Alliance, which brought funders and startup companies together, raising over $150 million. He was a delegate to the White House Conference on Small Businesses, and he holds multiple graduate degrees from City University of New York and New York University. Welcome, Mr. Bass.
Thank you, and thank you for having me as your guest this morning. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for taking the time out of your schedule. So let's get right into it, because this is an important topic. We're trying to get the pulse of what really goes on in the COVID-19 crisis situations in various different industries and professions on Long Island. So the business consultancy and advisory role that you play is very significant, because most of the businesses in our region, or even in the country for that matter, are small businesses. And as such, there are times when they need a higher level of expertise to make decisions for their business. So can you tell us the types of requests that you get? And in particular, has that changed under the COVID-19 situation?
Well, typically the requests that I get are for assistance in analyzing either an opportunity to expand a business or to, on the other end of the spectrum, to help help the owner of the business resolve a problem. COVID is it's a different creature. Much like the virus itself, there is so much that is unknown about the virus, and there's so much unknown about how business is responding to the closures which were required to help stem the growth of the virus.
So have you found that those requests that you are getting are flavored more towards what's going to happen? What can we do to survive? What can we do to help our company maintain itself? Is that the change that you're seeing now?
Yes. First, of course, there is how do we survive? How do we access the loan programs that the federal government has made available? There was and there still exists a very significant amount of concern about the application process, and believe it or not, there are still some companies going through the application process. Questions arise literally every day about the obligation of businesses and business owners to repay the loans. Even the easier of the loans, the PPP loan, which provides monies to help companies sustain payroll and to pay rent and to pay their utilities during the covered period. There are still questions about which components of those loans are going to be forgiven, how they're going to be forgiven, what guidance should banks be giving these companies. And the banks, quite frankly, don't have all the answers because the SBA has not provided all the answers.
So my sense is that there's a lot of confusion in terms of the guidance that is issued, is coming, may come, and so forth. You must have your hands full keeping on top of this.
Yes, I'm getting at least 20 to 30 calls a day, frankly, from clients that I've had over a decade or two ago that are just pulling their hair out about how to respond to the loans. How do they hire their people back? Under what circumstances? What obligations do they have in informing employees who might have been furloughed and can now come back because the loans will permit that, but they're deciding to stay off because they're making more money on unemployment than they apparently did in some instances when they were employed. What are the obligations to the employer in notifying that employee, and what are the obligations of the employee in responding to the employer? So that there are so many issues with regard to the idle loan.
My head hurts. My head hurts from all of this stuff. Thank God there are people like you around, because my head just hurts when I try to wrap it around these things.
Well, I have a bottle of Anacin. In fact, I'm on my third bottle now.
Right
Right at my desk.
I know it's such.
But seriously,
You have to hold on to your sense of humor, because otherwise it's just way too dark. Especially
you have to have a sense of humor, but it's got to be held in check because there are some very serious issues here.
So, do you find that there's a universal situation in the clients that you work with? Is there something that just seems to go across the board, across industries, across sizes? Is there something that says we're all the same?
Yes. How do we pay the loans back? When do we start paying them back? Under what circumstances? What kinds of records do we need to keep? Do we keep a separate set of books relative to the loans while also recording the debt on our own financial statements? What are our reporting responsibilities under PPP as well as under EIDL? When do we submit reports? How often do we have to do that? To whom do we provide those reports? Is it to the bank? Is it to the SBA? Is it to both? And quite frankly, the answers to many of those questions are still being formulated by the SBA itself. Not all of the regulations have come down yet.
Like cooking on the fly. It's
correct.
It's crazy. So, because you work on both sides, operational and financial, in terms of remaining relevant, what are you telling the companies that you work with about staying top of mind in the marketplace? And how are they supposed to do that? And what advice have you been giving them?
Well, a number of years ago, I coined a term which was actually copyrighted called the triangle of profitability. And I place the business owner at the base of that triangle. It's an equilateral triangle, if you could picture it. And the other two sides of the triangle are, on the one hand, the customers for that business's products or services. On the other hand, it's the vendors who produce the products that may allow the business person to sell to his or her or their customers. So in many respects, they're the maestros. They are the people that are bringing together the vendors, understanding what problems the vendors are having themselves, and being able to coordinate the proper distribution of vendor goods into the business person's business to be assembled or repackaged in some way to sell to the customers. So everyone is kind of in their own little triangle, and right now those triangles are trying to become tangential in a very productive way.
I mean, I've been advising my clients that now is not the time to hunker down. Now is the time to stay in front of your client base, in front of your prospects.
Absolutely. It's all communications.
Exactly. With the same message you've always had, just redouble your effort. I mean, if anybody's been around it, we're in 2008, 2009, and the aftermath thereof, the people who survived were the ones who took that to heart and stayed aggressive with their marketing and so forth. I mean, I'm a marketer, so I'm going to say that anyhow, but the point is that you have to be ready. When we're ready to open, you better be ready to open, because otherwise your competitor's going to eat your lunch.
That's exactly right. And look, under any circumstances, it's important to maintain a very active line of communication with your customers, with your vendors, their suppliers, as appropriate, so that you have a fluidity of business. You know what your supply chain is, where the bottlenecks may arise at any one time. So if that practice is adopted during a more normal business environment, it's going to serve the business person well during the current environment we find ourselves in.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. I recall it very vividly, 2008, 2009, the adjustments that had to be made. And this is 2008 and 9 times 3 or 4 or 5, or maybe even more.
Right.
So knowing the unknown is impossible, right?
Yes.
I've been asking my guests if they would comment on what they see once business can reopen, and how long do they think it's going to take to get back to some semblance of normalcy.
You know, before we started our discussion this morning, I was listening to the opening comments of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. Anthony Fauci, among some other people, are going to be testifying today. And what I gleaned from all of that, even though there were preliminary remarks by the senators, was that no one has a clear answer to when and how business will really get back to what anyone could define as normalcy at this point. Certainly here in the New York region, unless you're in the Finger Lakes or Rochester, where the state is going to begin reopening, the downstate area, I believe, if we're lucky, we'll have a reopening, hopefully beginning in the middle of June, hopefully. And at that point, I would dare say it's going to be very, very modest. In fact, Greg, you may recall this morning, earlier in the morning, I sent you a link to a webinar that is being conducted by a fairly large law firm this afternoon on how business owners should prepare themselves and their workplaces for getting ready for reopening. How do they accommodate social distancing requirements? How do they accommodate cleaning of their machinery as appropriate? What kind of PPE will be needed for employees depending upon the nature of the business? And it's a new reality. So even when businesses reopen, they could expect an element of cost that they never had to incur before.
True.
And that is going to have an impact on cash flow and certainly on their profitability.
Yeah, it's something that my company's been planning for in terms of PPE and being able to sanitize the workspaces that people have to work in. Don't forget, we have mailing equipment that is always on the move, and many people touch it. And we're actually setting up a schedule of cleansing so that we can mitigate any residue from the virus. So it's an interesting scenario. It's way different, something that nobody's ever seen before, nobody ever wanted to see. And I think we all just need to be able to understand that we have to be in this together.
There's no question about it.
Rebels can't go off unhinged. We have to be thoughtful, cautious, and yet on the same hand, be aggressive in terms of our business to keep it, to let it survive.
And never lose focus about the direction your business was heading in before the pandemic. Where was the business? How was the business structured beforehand? What problems needed to be addressed and resolved? And on a more positive note, what opportunities were available to the company to seize? And what strategies would be employed to either resolve the problems or seize the opportunities? The problems and opportunities may require new definition under the quote new normal that we find ourselves in, but they're still there and they need to be addressed.
Interesting. That's excellent advice. Where were you before? And try and play off that as best you can, and keep it as close to that as you possibly can. Of course, it's going to be different. We all understand that, but to start from that point, I think is very good advice. So, Jeffrey, I really thank you very much for taking the time to sit down with us. I wish you all the best. I wish your clients all the best, and I just hope and pray that we come out of this strong and better and healthy. Thank you.
I believe we will. It may take time. It may take a significant amount of patience on all our parts. But if we do what we can to stay healthy and stay wise, and always look ahead, never look backward, always look ahead, we will come out of this, and we may come out of it much more strongly than we entered it.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Greg, for this opportunity to speak with you.